Hey everyone, so today I'm going to show you guys how to hem evening wear fabrics, also known as special occasion fabrics. Here I have an iridescent chiffon, a pleated chiffon, an organza. For the organza, we're going to do a metallic black and gold scalloped lace trim. This is 3 inches wide. You could always cut it along the center and then have double the length of the scallop to use along the bottom edge. Or you could use what's called the eyelash, which is this eyelash edge. There's also an eyelash along the center. So you could use either the scalloped edge or the center, that straight edge, as a hem. But I'm going to show you how to do the scallop edge, and then we're going to trim away the organza that's underneath. I also have this stretch satin where I'm going to do a double scalloped edge floral lace. This also has the eyelash trim. You could also split the lace so you can have this floral pattern. So I'll do both this edge and the scallop along the bottom to show you some differences in what you could do with this style. I'm going to show you how to hem the satin as well. Here we have a natural silk 4-ply crepe in beige. Here is a scarlet velvet that's 100% polyester. I'm leaving the selvage in so you guys can see the difference of when you are cutting your fabrics and you're hemming them. Velvet's a tricky one because you don't want to cut in the direction that it looks dull in. So we'll get into that later. This is a wool crepe. It's very spongy. I'll show you how to hem it by splitting the fabric because it is double-faced. This is one of my favorite fabrics. Between the color and the weight of it, it's also got a little bit of stretch, which is nice, so you can do some really cool seam lines and stuff. We have a stretch wool crepe. It's a little less weight than the double wool crepe. Still has a little bit of stretch as well. So I'll show you how to do a hem on this also. And our signature brocade. I love brocades. Really fun on the back and the front as well. I love the metallic of this one. Quality is really nice too. So let's jump into doing the hems. I'm gonna do some turned up hems, some special hems. We're also gonna use what's called a double fold bias tape. As you can see, it has one fold and then a second. So when you attach this bias tape, it makes the edge nice and clean, and then we would turn up the hem again. So let's get into it. First hem that we're gonna do for this special occasion fabric is on the stretch satin that has the double eyelash lace on it. So all I've done so far was I pinned my eyelash edge with silk pins a little bit away from the bottom edge of my silk satin, because after we do our zigzag in here, which you can do by hand, but I'm going to show you on the machine, we're going to trim away the satin that's underneath so that we just have the scallop edge with the satin backing. I also pinned it along the top edge as well, so I'm going to do the zigzag stitch along the top. But this is a very common edging with evening wear, special occasion, and also lingerie. So I have a size 11 needle on my machine right now, and I'm going to change it to my zigzag setting. I'm also going to make the width a little bit smaller and the length of my stitch a little bit smaller as well. So I have a 2-2 right now, and we will see if we like that. Again, you should always practice on a scrap first, but just so everyone's aware, I'm gonna catch just at the edge here. So I want my zigzag stitch to kind of like hug this edge of the lace without going over top or past the eyelash or too far into the lace. So just drop my foot. I'm gonna do a back tack here. Okay, I'm happy with the size of this stitch, so I'm going to chuck my pins as I take them out. Silk pins are much thinner, so they won't damage the fabric, and they're better to use with silk or evening special occasion fabrics because you don't want to damage anywhere that you've had pins. So I'm just gonna rotate. You can also drop your needle, lift your foot and pivot as you're going along this scalloped edge. So see how I'm just turning my fabric? You can leave your pins in or you can remove them as you're sewing. I like to drop my needle first before I pivot my fabric because I don't want anything to shift, or sometimes a stitch will like snag if you don't have the needle down before you turn the fabric. And then you'll get like bubbles and you'll have to take the whole stitch out. Better be safe than sorry. Do like a continuous stitch. It just looks more expensive too, especially from the back side. I'll show you that because my bobbin is also black. So now that I've done my zigzag along this edge, you can kind of see, thankfully I didn't get any puckering. If you do get any puckering, I see a teensy bit here, but like I'll survive. You may want to make your tension a little less, but again, you need to practice first before you try this. So that's how my zigzag looks on the wrong side of the fabric. See how it's dull? So we know that that's the wrong side of the satin. You can see the shine here through the lace. So before I trim up this edge, I'm gonna do the top of this lace because it has the double eyelash. So you wanna be sure you secure it on both sides of the trim. So now I'm gonna do the same for the top edge. You can put as many pins as you like. The silk pins won't damage your fabric. So I sewed the top edge there of my lace. So you could imagine that this is like, you know, like a slip dress or something. Be sure that when you're pinning your lace onto your satin, that it's laying flat. You can always press out any little puckers that you get. So you can worry about that later. But now I'm gonna cut away from my hem edge. And you can do that from the back or the front. If this is your first time and you want to be careful that you don't cut the eyelashes off, you can trim that from the front of the fabric. I've got these really cute, tiny little ganger nippers that you can find on the Mood website. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sandwich my blade edge between the satin and the eyelash. And I'm going to cut away, making sure not to cut my stitches. This is definitely like a couture style technique because it is very advanced. Easier to do not on camera, but I want you guys to learn everything your hearts can imagine. So you don't want to cut off your eyelashes. I'm pretty sure I'm doing that right now. Oh, I didn't. Okay, that's good. Whew. But you should be trimming this from the right side of the fabric. I just want you to be sure you're aware of how close you should be cutting to that zigzag. And I'm kind of like pushing my scissor upward so that it's hitting the satin more than it's hitting the lace. Now you can start to see my eyelash on the other side. It's definitely a more advanced hemming technique. So practice first, don't get frustrated, and then you can move on to more expensive lace. So I'm just gonna cut here and show you guys the right side, and then we'll jump on to our next hem, because this will take me forever to do. Patience. But look at how beautiful that is. Oh my God, so pretty. And it looks so expensive, and it took like no time to do, and it's just a zigzag. So you wouldn't trim it at the top because that would be into your garment. But basically you would just top stitch that applique as a zigzag, and voila. So that's how you attach an eyelash lace to a charmeuse. So now we're gonna hem a double eyelash edge lace to an organza. Organza fabric is like tissue weight. It's very, very, very advanced to work with, but it's a beautiful outcome, and you can sell your garment for a lot of money, so that's nice too. We're also gonna do a zigzag on the machine, and then I can show you how to do it by hand as well. So this lace is item number 120455, and it is an Italian metallic black and gold scalloped lace trim. It is 3 inches wide, okay? So I'm gonna do the same as I did with the stretch satin, and I'm gonna do it with the machine. Because this is a lighter weight fabric, you have to be a lot more delicate with it and use that. I have an 11 size needle in my machine right now. So you need to practice first. I'm gonna use the same setting as before, only because I know my machine and I know how to applique onto organza. But I'm gonna go a lot slower with this. And I'm gonna work a little closer into the lace, because when I trim this, the organza has a tendency of fraying. You can use as many pins as you want. I'm gonna do halfway with lace, half without. So I can show you how to do a rolled baby hem on the organza without the applique. So with that being said, I'm gonna take this out, because it's good to know how to hem your organza as well, in case you wanna just do the hem for the organza before you do the applique. So I'll just trim this away. Because it has the double eyelash edge and it has an eyelash down the center, you can always cut this down the center. And then you have symmetrical, sorry, that was an accident. Then you have 2 symmetrical pieces of the lace, and you could do maybe like an applique that's like mitered, or applique that's further apart. Maybe you can use this as like a trim along a neckline and have the eyelash mimic each other on either side. So that's pretty. Save that for later. So like we did with the satin, where we did the zigzag on the top, we have on the bottom, the hem edge, we have to do it along the top as well. I'm gonna trim away this organza now. And because it's sheer and I can see right through it, which is very lovely, I don't have to be afraid of cutting my eyelash by accident. You could always, if this wasn't like a hem, if it was just an applique, you could just trim the center and then it would look like an illusion piece of lace after you'd done the zigzag. So now that we trimmed along the bottom edge, you have your lace trim on the hem. So pretty. And it's like, it's just delicate enough that it doesn't make it like too heavy, but it does keep the weight down if this is like a hem along the bottom of a dress. I'm gonna do a baby roller hem now, which is definitely more complex. I'm using black thread, which I shouldn't be doing, but this is just for the demo so you can actually see it. So now I'm on the wrong side of the organza, and I'm gonna turn this in. You can always go to the iron and turn that over, or you can finger press, just kind of like rolling. And you see how it's staying? Because that's from the friction and the heat of my fingertips. So you don't have to worry about damaging the fabric. Again, like I'm eyeballing this, it's about 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm gonna turn it over a second time. So when the hem is smaller and it's rolled, it's called a baby rolled hem or a baby hem. And you can take your silk pins if you like, and you can pin on a diagonal to keep that nice and flat. If you were pressing this at the iron, you should definitely use a presser cloth. You could use like a piece of muslin or any type of cotton fabric. So that would be your baby rolled hem. And you would definitely want to use either thread to match, or you could use invisible thread and do that hem by hand. I know I said I was gonna do the stitch on this by hand, but I'll get back to that in a sec. So I'm just gonna drop my needle on this folded edge that's closer to the inside of the fabric rather than the hem. And I'm gonna do my stitch at 1/8 of an inch. And I should probably change back to a straight stitch, so that's on me. So be sure you have your machine on a straight stitch setting. And you're gonna sew 1/8 of an inch from that folded edge. You would only use the invisible thread if you were sewing by hand, because in the machine it would break. It's like plastic thread that you can't see once the garment is sewn. So now we have our baby rolled hem. So this is the inside, and that's the outside of the fabric. So you've got your teeny little hem on organza, and then you also have your lace applique organza. Okay, so I'll show you guys how to do the stitches by hand. Using your invisible thread, I'm just gonna find a really thin needle, which is also known as a sharp needle. Sharps are usually a 9 or 11 size. You're not gonna do double thread with this elastic, so you'll just knot it. I like to take the loose end of my thread and the pointed end of my needle, and I wrap them like an X, and wrap my long end around the needle, pull it through while holding on to that, and then it creates a knot. So I've knotted my invisible thread. So we're gonna imagine that this is not totally in a random place. And I'm gonna pin this. So I'm gonna take the needle and I'm gonna come up from the wrong side of the lace. I'm gonna pull that through. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna mimic this zigzag stitch, and I'm gonna do it by hand. So we only have one length of thread, and I'm gonna do like, you could call it like sort of like I'm whipping the stitch around the edge. But this is nice because it's done by hand, and then you can't see the stitch once it's in the fabric. But you cannot press on top of this, it will melt. If you feel like too nervous to use the invisible thread, you can always just use a polyester thread because it's softer and it'll go through the fabric a lot nicer and smoother. You won't have to worry about snagging. And then you would obviously just knot it in the back. So after we've sewn with the invisible thread, see as I pull it, it kind of starts to gather up my lace. You don't want to sew it too tight. I'm just gonna rethread my needle so I can go to the back side and make a knot. So we did kind of like this, like, I just kind of jumped behind the lace and the organza, picked up a little. If you know how to do a whip stitch, that's similar to this technique. You're just kind of like wrapping the edge without pulling too tight. And you're doing it all from the right side of the fabric. Again, because it's invisible thread, you're not going to see any of those stitches, so you don't have to sweat like seeing it from the right side or the wrong side. And it's probably better that you do this flat and with lots of pins. So from the back you can't really see any of the stitching I've done, but I've actually done all of this here. So I'm just going to bring my needle and thread to the back of the fabric. And then to make a knot, I'm going to pick up a little bit of the actual fabric, and then I'm going to create my knot by just going back through that loop that I created. So pick up a little fabric, and then the loop that you're creating with the needle, well, with the thread really, you're just going to put the needle right back through that and pull it, not too tight because you don't want to make a hole. And then you can just clip this and you've got your applique on there. So this is the hem. Then I just took the applique and I created kind of like a scallop that looks distanced. Again, if you would want to, you could always do the applique like in the center of the fabric with this type of like double-edged scallop and just cut away the organza, but there would have to be fabric on this side and this side, and then when you cut out that organza it would create like an illusion, so there'd be no backing. With organza fabric you don't want to put too much on it because then the weight kind of dictates where the fabric's going to fall, and that's how you do a scallop edged lace applique hem on organza. So next we're going to hem brocade. This is the outer or the right side of the fabric, and this is the back or the wrong side. You can use whichever side you like, but I definitely prefer the right side of this brocade. What I've done so far is, I will take this back and I will show you. So all of the hems that I'm doing are just an inch. So I've pressed an inch up on all of these swatches. This is that double fold bias tape, and it's 1/2 inch width. So when you buy it, the width measurement is how much the finished width is of the bias tape. So what I did is I opened up the bias tape, sandwiched my brocade inside, closed my bias tape. I put on these really awesome little wonder clips that you can find on the Mood website. And then I turned up this hem. But before we turn up the hem, we have to attach the bias tape. So I'm going to sew with the right side up. My bias tape is clipped, and I'm going to do a 1/8 of an inch stitch along this edge that's closest to the brocade. The bias tape is basically just like a fancier, more luxurious, like finished edge on your hems. I wouldn't necessarily just like put the bias tape and that's the finished hem, because it looks like, you know, it's contrast. So unless you're going for that look with your design, you could always buy a bias tape or create your own bias tape that matches your fabric. So now that my bias tape is attached, I'm going to just cut this excess here. And I'm going to turn my hem up. So in this instance, you could do the blind hem again, which you would do by hand. But because this is a contrast, and I think that's really pretty, like when you're putting the garment on, you'll see like this is kind of like a design detail. I'm just going to do the top stitching because it's just more secure than doing it by hand, because this bias tape does add a little bit of weight. So now I'm gonna do a 1/8 of an inch top stitch along the edge closest to the fabric. So not the hem edge, the other edge. Again, you would want to use thread that matches your self fabric, but for this demo, I'm doing it in contrast so you can see all of the work that I'm doing. That's the inside, which I think is so gorgeous and like luxe looking and expensive because it kind of almost makes the fabric look continuous. And then on the front or the outside, if you use like a gold or like this mauve colored thread, you wouldn't see the stitch at all. And I think it's just more stable than doing a hand stitch.